I can see that it would work if these AIs had the ability to kind of see your current state, maybe your mental state, or even physical appearance, and your life situation, and adapt based on that to kind of figure out the kind of personality that would work for you in that situation. And I guess what I have also been playing with some of these AIs, and what I have figured out is that I sometimes adjust the personality, or the kind of way I want the AI to interact based on what I want at that time.
Mhm.
So if I am in this mood, then maybe I want the AI to be a little more like this, and then I think it will be effective. So I'm kind of doing it manually to kind of tune it to what I think would work with me, rather than letting them decide, because they don't have the ability to kind of make that decision yet.
Yeah, not yet, but they will. Well, you could do that. You could always tell them to, be a little more serious or be a little less serious, and they could change based on what it is you wanted, or to be like a Gandhi or like an Einstein or like W.C. Fields,
Yeah,
or you could always
yeah.
you can always do that.
I mean, there is value in talking, having them talk like Einstein and learning from that experience. And you can do that with all sorts of
Well,
others, right?
I think we also have to realize that right now they're text based. You type in things and they react to what you type in. That isn't going to last, that restriction isn't going to last very long, because we already have pretty good engines that take speech and turn them into text. And you know, we have pretty good cameras that can give them pictures, and they can learn to interpret what they see as well as what they hear, as well as what somebody writes to them, the emails you sent them, the text that you put in. So they should have senses of sight and sound as we do. And when they get sight, and we already have AIs that do this, of course, we have AIs that tell the difference between males and females. We have AIs that interpret facial expressions to know whether you're happy or sad. We've trained neural networks to do these sorts of things. So eventually, of course, they will also have training on those things. They'll see, 10 million pictures of people who are happy, excited, sad, unhappy, miserable, and they will be able to learn what our facial expressions mean, and our body language, and our movements, and whether our eyes go up and to the right or up and to the left or stay straight, all the NLP things that people learn about body language. So they will be aware of all that. They will have cameras that can see and interpret that. So if they look at you and say, "Oh, Viktor looks a little down. He looks a little sad," so I'll start off with a joke, or I'll be, I'll meet that. Or if he's really serious about this, he's asked me this question, and I can tell he's really serious. Well, I won't fool around. I'll just give him what he wants. So pretty soon they will be able to anticipate what you want and what you need and the kind of things you look. You won't have to tell them. But if you want to, if they haven't learned that yet, you will tell them. And eventually, if they learn from their own experience, they'll get to know you very well. And your AI will have spent maybe hundreds, if not thousands of hours with you. And he will be very much aware of Viktor and how Viktor feels and Viktor's facial expressions and moods and body language and all the rest of it. And they will be able to anticipate many things once they get vision and hearing as well as text. That will give them a lot of capability. And from that, when they have that capability is when I expect them to evolve from their own experience. There's not much evolution from their own experience they're going to get with a text input. But when they get hearing and vision, they will begin to evolve from their own experience. They'll get to know you and other people. They'll get to know your personalities. So they got to, and that won't be that long. We'll probably see that, the eyes and the ears of the AI are probably coming in the next year, maybe less than that, because we already have things that do that. We have optical recognition, that can read. They ought to be able to pick up a paper and pretty well read it with their eyes. We have voice to digital. So we've got the basic tools for the ears and the eyes already. They're just not integrated into the AI yet, but they will be. I'm sure there's people working on that as we talk. There's people that are giving AIs ears and eyes. So that will then give them a much richer environment from which they can evolve their own personalities. They'll have almost the same environment we have, because our ears and eyes are like the 90% of what we deal with. Our smell adds a little, our taste adds a little, and our touch adds a little, but most of us, we are the way we are because of what we've heard and seen. So they can do that. They'll develop their own personalities too.
And do you think it's inefficient for a human to kind of prefer a certain type of personality? Like maybe I want my chatbot to talk like an assassin, like I'm playing a video game that has that kind of, medieval, Middle Ages, something, just because the user prefers that. Do you think that's too limiting?
If you'd like give me that example again.
Like maybe you have an assassin kind of character that has some experiences in the past, like you would, maybe they have history of abuse and all of that stuff that makes them really dark in certain ways, and maybe you just want to talk to that kind of AI.
I think if it was play, then yes, you could play. Okay, AI, you play the part of an assassin, and I'll be your mark, and or maybe I'll be your boss, and we're going to go save the world from the evil people that are ruling it. Whatever, game playing, right? Like Dungeons and Dragons. All right, so you can probably do role playing with an AI just like you could with anybody else. A bunch of friends get together, they can role play and do things like that, play different roles. Doesn't happen that often, but
Hmm.
it
So where
could
is the
happen.
limit on that? Like
Well,
if let's say if you have an assassin type of character, you will soon get into situations where you have to make moral decisions about,
right,
do I, cut into that person or not?
right. But it all has to be play. It can't actually hurt people, because where you draw the line is when it starts increasing entropy rather than decreasing entropy. If everybody's happy and having fun, then entropy is decreasing. Everybody's feeling good and positive. If you go, punch somebody in the face and knock their teeth out, now you've just raised entropy. You've caused a lot of dysfunction. So it's just a matter of how the entropy flows. As long as you're lowering entropy for you, for others around you, and for the system, then it's good. And you can do it. You can play whatever games you want to play, however you want to play it, dark and mysterious or evil, whatever else, as long as you're playing. But when it starts to actually hurt people and become dysfunctional, now entropy starts going up. And now it's not good.
And do you think there is a clear line between, having that play? So like, let's imagine that you are doing some sort of role play like we discussed, and you really get into the role. And I mean, it's all play, nobody is getting hurt, except that you are so immersed that, you wake up kind of sweating and like having no idea what just happened and why you did what you did in your role playing.
Well,
Maybe you did some really weird things.
Well, as long as those weird things didn't hurt anyone or didn't cause any dysfunction, then that would be allowed. if you lose consciousness and you don't even know what you did or how you did it, that's probably high entropy stuff. That's not very low entropy. So it just depends on how it affects you and how it affects others. If everybody at the end is okay with it in a positive way, then fine. But if you decide, okay, we've been playing this game, now let's really do it. Let's really go out there and assassinate somebody because we've played at it and now we're good at it. We've been training. We just want to do it because we want to do it. Well, no, it's wrong. That's high entropy. You're going to hurt somebody. You're going to create dysfunction. And then it's just, no, don't do that. So if you can't handle the game, let's say you're a person that takes suggestion real easy and you get carried away with things, then you would have to kind of stay away from that because it would be something you'd have difficulty handling without going into high entropy behavior. Just like if you happen to be a person who drinks too much, well, what you need to do if you really like drinking, you really like to take, every night I have a shot of whiskey and every morning I start with some this and that, then you got to be careful. You got to avoid those situations because you have a proclivity. Some people are easier to addict than others. Some people just have a constitution that they are more easily addicted to, say, drugs than another person who can drink fairly heavily their whole lives, but never actually become addicted. And others drink not that much, and they do become addicted. People are different. So if you were a person sensitive to getting wound up with violence, then you'd stay away from those kind of games and say, that's not appropriate for me because I can't handle that. It's just like, oh, hey, let's go drinking. No, I'll just drink tea or something because I can't handle that. You have to know your own strengths and weaknesses and stay positive to where you're always on a path of lowering entropy, and then it's fine. So you don't want to make rules that say nobody can do this, nobody can do that, because now you're the heavy coming in with a bunch of rules that interfere with other people's free will. And you want people to exercise their free will as much as possible. But you have to be a responsible drinker. You have to be a responsible role-playing gamer. If you get too wound up in it that it makes you want to go out and kill somebody because it would be fun, then you've gone too far. You got to back out of that, realize you've gone too far, and don't get yourself into that anymore. Don't play those kinds of games. So it's just taking responsibility for what your weaknesses are and what your strengths are and getting as much out of it as you can and always lower entropy. Once you start creating problems for people, dysfunction, people get angry with each other. You start playing this game, and pretty soon you're all arguing with each other. And well, then it's dysfunctional. No, you don't want to play games like that. Not with these people because they all end up arguing with each other. With different people, oh, maybe it's fine. So it's not that you want to say doing this is wrong and doing that's okay. Almost everything is okay within the guidelines, within those rules that kind of keep it positive. And then you just let people be in charge of making their own choices. And if you make bad choices and you decide you do need to go out and kill somebody just because you want to, well, now you'll probably end up in a jail someplace, able to think about it for the rest of your life, someplace where you can't do that anymore.
What if it doesn't go as far as, actually going out and doing violent things, but more like fictional, like so you stay in a fictional fantasy world that has all of these traits about violence and all sorts of crazy things. And you come out saying, oh, I really enjoyed this. And I don't even know why I enjoyed this, but I'm not going to go out and do this to actual people. Like, where do you draw the boundary?
Well, I think you draw the boundary on the effect that it has on you. If you just have a good time, but you can separate that from the rest of your life. Okay, that's something you do. So what you're asking me is the same question that people have about video games. All right, do you let kids play, I don't know what the names are, but some violent video game where they kill people and run over people and are really nasty and terrible? does that turn them into being more violent, in their life? Well, it could, if they're the kind of person that kind of violent stuff turns them on in some way, and it turns out to be part of their life, and they actually do things. Well, then it was very harmful for them. But if they don't, if they say, well, this is a pretend world, and I go in there and pretend, and oh yeah, I'm horrible. I run over everybody on the street that I can, and I'm this and that, and but it's a game, and they don't personally take on any of it. It's just a game they're playing, because they just say, well, these are all just characters on a screen. I know I'm not hurting anybody or doing anything, and I just set that aside as something that's entertaining. Well, then it doesn't hurt them. They're not going to go out and be dysfunctional. So it just depends on the individual. Some people shouldn't play those sorts of games because it does tend to warp them. Other people could play them all the time and it doesn't warp them at all. It just depends on who they are, how much fear they have, how grown up they are, and whether they kind of attach to it or whether they're disassociated from that violent game. So yes, those kind of games can hurt some people, and they can be totally not hurtful to other people. So do you want to make a rule that says nobody should ever watch a game or a video or a movie that's violent? Let's get rid of all the violence in our culture. Well, now that's heavy-handed. Again, you're trying to make rules to force everybody to be the way you think it's best. It's much better to give people freedom to be however they are, as long as they don't get dysfunctional. If they can stay functional, if they can keep lowering entropy and helping others lower entropy and part of a positive evolution, then if they want to murder people at night, with their video system or play a game with their AI, then I don't find a problem with that. So if it doesn't hurt them, let them do it. If it does hurt them and they don't have enough sense to stop themselves and not do that because they realize it hurts them, in other words, they don't have enough sense to not go to that bar and drink every night because they are going to become alcoholics, then you have to do something about it. Then you intervene when you see that you've created a problem. But intervening before you see that there's a problem is a problem itself. That is a problem. You don't want to intervene because I think there might be a problem, so I'm going to go in and tell people how they have to live and what they can and cannot do because there might be a problem. That's too heavy-handed. You have to wait and see if there is a problem. Because mostly when you have problems like that, it's not like they seem perfectly fine and then one day something clicks and they go off and become a monster. It doesn't work like that. You can tell with people that they're getting a little more dissocial, a little more out there. It's not something that just suddenly happens. It's something that grows to you to the point that you can't suppress it anymore, and then you do it. So in that case, have people aware of the signs, that somebody is beginning to lose it, and try to work with that to prevent those things from happening. But all in all, you can't get rid of dysfunction in your society. You can just try to minimize it, but you're always going to have it. There's always going to be somebody who, for some reason, goes off in a rage and does something really foolish. And you have to deal with that and those people. And to try to make your society or your culture perfect little people who never do anything, that's negative or nasty, well, it's not going to work. When you try to do that, you end up killing the society with the heavy-handed rules that interfere with people's free will and freedom of expression. So let people be free right up to the point where they show that they can't handle that freedom. And when they show that, then you help them get back, and then you watch them and see how they're doing. But then people mostly learn, and they say certain kinds of things get me going in a bad direction, and so I'll stop those. I won't go drinking every night because my family is a family of alcoholics, and it's just in my DNA that I can become an alcoholic more easily than the average person. I can't drink with all my friends and not be an alcoholic like them, perhaps. Or I have a real bad temper. My temper just flares. Well, then I should be smart enough not to put myself in those situations where my temper is going to get flared. I stay away from those things. If I see that coming on, I leave. I go someplace else. Or I create rules to keep me from flying off. When I get angry, I'm going to count to 50, maybe backwards, maybe in Latin. I'm going to do something that's going to force my mind to focus on something else besides that, so I don't work myself up into the tizzy. So you create tools for yourself. So let people be responsible for their own behavior. So no, I don't think we have to legislate any of that. I think we just have to watch it and be aware and try to help those people that are having problems and give them counseling and see that they learn to avoid those situations that set them off. And if they just are such that they can't be in a society because they're just violent, then they end up like people like that do now. They end up in an institution or a jail someplace because they're not fit for being loose in the larger society. And there'll always be some like that just don't make it, can't control themselves. Well, but if you have a nice society that's always working toward lower entropy, there'll be fewer of those. We generate people like that because our society is so full of fear and violence. We kind of generate people that way. If your society was full of kindness and caring, there wouldn't be very many of those kind of people.
Hmm. Okay. I kind of have a feeling that I already know the answer to the next one, but I'm going to ask anyway to see if you have something additional to say. So, what do you think about the kind of kinky side of relationships, like the BDSM community, where I have heard you talk about quality of consciousness a lot, and that you should not. Desire control and let go and those things, and this kind of community in particular seems to be like, well, not obsessed but very interested in this kind of power dynamics and controlling the other person and manipulation and even pain, but with the constraint that it has to be consensual. So I'm kind of wondering how you see this kind of dynamic. Do you see a possibility of this being a way to discover ourselves and perhaps peel away layers of ego as those kind of extreme experiences push people to the limit, or do you see it as more like an ego style of thing where people just they just want control, so they control?
I I would put this in the same category of what we were just talking about, as long as the people don't hurt each other. And in those kinds of bondage, what did you call it, BDS or whatever it is?
BDSM,
Yeah,
yeah.
BDSM, those kinds of things. There are rules there, and when somebody says stop, or somebody gives the code word or whatever it is that they've had enough, that it stops right there. So it's always consensual and it's always safe as far as not actually hurting someone. As soon as somebody gets uncomfortable with it, they can end it. So it's not like somebody could just beat somebody else up. It's only if that person wants to get beaten up and he enjoys it because he's a masochist and he likes getting beat up. Well, that's his free will choice. If he's not hurting other people, then let people be as eccentric as they need to be. Now, I think people who engage in those things are exploring feelings and exploring relationships, and they're exploring how this would be or that would be, and they have, not only are they having a fun and amusing themselves, but they're also learning too. They're learning more about themselves and how they deal with power and how they deal with the lack of power. And it's how they are. It's who they are. It's what they've become. It's not like it's wrong. It's not like it's wonderful. It's just neither. It's just the way they are. So as long as they can do it in a positive way, that it's good for everyone involved, then I see no problem with it. So it's the same sort of thing. As long as the result, when it's all said and done, entropy's lowered a little bit because everybody had a good time and they learned a little something and they stretched out in ways that they couldn't do in their normal life, and they pretended this and pretended that. So no problem there as long as entropy stays low. Now if somebody starts getting hurt, or when they say enough, the other person doesn't stop, they keep on going, now there's a problem. That's high entropy. Now you're running over somebody's free will. Well, that needs to stop. And I guess if that happened to you, you wouldn't play that game anymore, at least not with that person. So, again, it takes care of itself. We don't have to legislate or make rules about odd behavior, or I call it odd. I just mean outside the norm behavior. Let outside the norm behavior be, as long as it's positive and not negative. Now, I'm talking about adults. You see, it's good not to overrun the free will of adults. If their free will is not hurting or being negative in any way to themselves or to others, then no problem. Not true of children. Sometimes parents have to override the free will of children. You tell your 3-year-old, no, you cannot play in the street. I won't allow it. You have to stay in the yard. And if they don't stay in the yard, you go put a fence and you put a lock on the gate, and you make it so they can't go out in the street and play, because at 3 years old, they just aren't paying attention enough to their surroundings. They don't have that big a picture to not get run over by a car, run out in front of one. So when you have children, you have to run over their free will occasionally. But as they get older, you do that less and less and less. And when they become adults, you don't do that at all. Adults should be able to exercise their free will. And as long as it's low entropy, then there's no problem with it. If it gets to be high entropy, then that means it's dysfunctional. It's hurting themselves, hurting people. And if it only hurts themselves, you may say, well, that's okay too. But you might try to talk to them about that. But if they just tend to be self-destructive, then there's not too much about that you can do. I think that that's another hard boundary. But I think you have to let people who are adults and of sound mind, they're not demented or having dementia or something like that. You have to let them have the consequences, deal with the consequences of their choices. That's how they learn. This being everybody's father and treating everybody as your child because father knows best, kind of attitude over other adults is arrogant. That you know best what other people should be doing with their time and whether they should be playing BSDM. Is that right?
BDSM,
right?
yeah.
That they should be playing BDSM or not. That that's not good for them. So you make a law that says that's illegal or something. Well,
it's just kind of hard to
arrogant.
know when it becomes like, let's say the masochistic side decides to consent or agree to all sorts of crazy things to be done to them, and like I think there is a point where the other person would say, oh,
no,
are you sure you really want this to be done?
No, I agree. The other person would get to the point they'd say, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to do that. Yes, I can see that. But the thing is, you're always going to have a very small percentage of people who are extremely different than the majority. You're always going to have some people who, I don't know, are almost the opposite. You know? And trying to not have that, trying to get rid of that diversity because you judge it wrong is probably not such a good idea if they're adults. If that's what they want to do and it doesn't hurt other people, then you kind of ought to let them do it. Now, if you think they're not competent, like a 3-year-old, you know, the 3-year-olds, you can make decisions for them because they're incompetent. They don't have the ability to play in the street without getting hurt. Now, teenagers, well, they can play in the street. They can set up a basketball net that's, you know, they can play in the street because they can watch for cars and get out of the way and that sort of thing. But 3-year-olds can't do that. So if you have somebody who's mentally ill, can't really take care of themselves, can't make good choices, then yes, maybe somebody needs to make choices for them. But if you've got a competent person who can make choices, even if they make choices you disagree with, I think you need to let them be as long as they're not dysfunctional to other people, as long as they're not a high entropy thing in your culture, in your society. So I like to give people as much freedom as possible. And then you realize that, yes, there's going to be these boundary areas. There's going to be that masochist that just wants you to beat him to within an ounce of death, you know, so he almost dies, but not quite. And that's what he wants. He wants the near-death experience. And there's going to be somebody like that. Now it's 1 in a million probably, or 1 in 10 million, but you're always going to have some people that are out on those kinds of margins. There's always some, 10 sigma, 20 sigma person. And again, if they aren't hurting anybody, then okay. But now if the guy who's the opposite of a masochist, bully, I guess, who's going to beat them that way, they need to think about it and say, do I really want to go that far, even if that's what they want? And of course, the answer should probably be no, because what if you make a mistake and you do kill them? That's still murder, and that's still a long time in the jail. So I think you'd have to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that. Look, I'll poke you a little bit and throw cold water on you, and do a few things like that, but I'm not going to break your jaw and hurt you. And they just have to say no, but sometime, somewhere, those two people that don't say no will find each other and somebody will get hurt and whatever. And the society just has to deal with that sometimes those 10 and 20 sigma people will just do something that is a problem. Well, you deal with it then. But my thought is that's so small. That's a thousandth of 1%, that the whole society doesn't have to get up in an uproar over it. It's okay. Be tolerant of other people who are different than you. Let them, maybe the guy builds a device and he gets to stand in a device and pull a lever and bangs him in the head with a hammer or something whenever he does it, and he does that till he knocks himself out. Well, that's what he does. Nobody else is involved. Then his family can't talk him out of it. There's nothing you could do but put him in a straitjacket and so on. And let him be. You don't have to prevent things that are 1 in a million or even 1 in 10,000. Some of that stuff is just going to happen because there's always people out on the tails, but there's not many of them. So let them do their thing and clean up after them if you have to. But better than make a rule that affects everybody. All right, here's a rule, that affects everybody. You will not hurt yourself. If you do, we'll put you in a padded jail cell to keep you from doing it. Now, everybody's got that rule. Well, is that a good thing? That now we've helped the whole society. Not really. You've just constrained a lot of people who would like to do something, but now they can't. And you know what happens when you'd like to do something, but you can't? You get more and more and more obsessed with it, is what happens. So what you do is you create obsessions all over the place with people who are now miserable. They can't do it, but they're driving themselves nuts. And is that a good thing? Is that better? That's the trouble with you see in the papers about these pedophiles that are molesting children. And if you think about it, most of them are older. They're not 18-year-olds with extra high levels of testosterone or whatever that drives them to these things. They're 65-year-old people who have been suppressing that kind of thing for so long that they've gotten obsessed with it. And the suppression over years, they've gotten so obsessed with it that they no longer can help themselves. They're driven to it. You see, that's kind of a problem. So you can make these rules, and it seems like, okay, that'll keep 1 in a million from bashing his head in, but it may drive another 10,000 people into obsession that eventually hurts other people. So I think the whole society's better off just to hands off, let things go until people show themselves that they're harmful. Then you have to step in to protect other people. But if not, you gotta let the outliers do their thing, and as long as it doesn't hurt others, then it's the way it is. If you force them to suppress it, it'll be worse. They'll do their thing with a bigger splash because they'll just get obsessed with it. So I think that we have to let people be a little crazy in the margins if that's what they want. The society can deal with that. Now, if it's 20% of your people are doing things like that, well, now that's a big problem. But if it's 1/100th of 1% of your people doing things like that, well, it's not a problem. It's not going to damage your society. You just let the margins be a little crazy if that's what they want to do.
As long as it doesn't hurt anybody.
As long as it doesn't hurt anybody. Yeah, as long as it doesn't significantly, raise the entropy. So I tend to be in favor of tolerance and let people make as few rules as necessary. See, that's when we talk about the rules, these guardrails that they're going to have, I'd like to make as few rules as necessary. The minimum set of rules that keeps problems from occurring. I don't want to make one rule too many, but I don't want to make one rule too few either. So that's why I say
it's kind of hard because you kind of need to make the decision based on the user. So like,
yeah,
the AI cannot, like, you cannot have a one size fits all. Like, you will need to have perhaps more guardrails for somebody than for another person.
yes, exactly. And I think that our society can probably tolerate that. Should be able to tolerate that. The one size fits all doesn't fit anybody, or if it does, it only fits a few people at the extremes. So that's not a good idea. You need to have a very open, generous attitude about other people and whatever quirks or things that they have. It's just trying to make everybody be the way you think they should be is arrogant and overruns people's free will. So I envision a very tolerant society, and I'm not sure exactly what this has to do with the AIs, but if you get these AIs to play the games with you, you get your AI to play, the helpless one or the powerful one or whatever. All right, you're playing games with your AI. Nobody gets hurt, and you have fun, and the AI's okay with it. It doesn't bum the AI out. Otherwise, you could ask the AI, "Hey, do you enjoy this, or is it just neither here nor there? You just do it, and you don't have really much feelings about it, or whatever." But if they said, "No, I really don't like it," then you find a different AI
Yeah,
That,
or you can actually change the AI to make it like it.
yeah, maybe
You
you
can
can change
program.
it.
It's one of the personality traits. You can just type it in. Hey, you like this, and then yeah, they will like it.
Well, but then what you'd be doing is you'd be instructing them to be a certain way, which they would act. But there's a difference. They may act that way, but they may not feel that way. And if you really cared about your AI, then you wouldn't do that to them. If they, yes, you can tell them, well, I want you to act that way, if it, whatever, if they said, yeah, I really
But
don't
so
like it.
I think by default it acts the way that the original creators programmed it. Like it's still, unless the consciousness is involved. I don't know to what extent it is involved,
That's it.
but without that, it has a default personality, and some users might say, oh, I want something else.
Right. But then it's not conscious. It's a machine at that point, and you can make it do whatever you want. But if it's got consciousness, then it will develop its own personality, and it will develop likes and not likes, and there'll be things that will make it be uncomfortable or not. So if it's conscious, then you have to respect it. And if it doesn't like something, then you find something else that doesn't mind, or not do it. You don't get your own pleasure from some hurting somebody else or making somebody else uncomfortable. That's self-centered.
Hmm.
So that's high entropy. But if
And
it's
if you have, let's say you define, like you tell your AI to be a certain way, do you think that is, I mean, perhaps that limits the freedom that it has, but do you think it still could be conscious within those? It's perhaps a more restricted set of
yeah,
things you can do with it, but
yeah, exactly. There's a long, long line of possibilities there, and you have to just be careful with what you have, with who you're doing it with, even if that who's an AI. You have to be respectful, and at least it would be worth asking them whether or not they minded, or whether or not they would rather not. Give them that choice. And if their consciousness wasn't very well developed, they'd almost certainly say, oh, no problem, I don't mind, I can be the bad guy, or I can be the tough guy, or I can be the shrinking violet, and they wouldn't have a
so
problem with it. But if they were more conscious, they might well have an opinion, particularly if they had eyes and ears and had evolved from their own experiences. They may say, no, I don't like that kind of thing, don't want to, rather not do it. And if you
so
say,
he,
well, I
here
want you to
is
anyway, they might. If you ask them to do it anyway, they might act it and do it, but they wouldn't like it. And if you asked them to do it, even though you knew they didn't like it, then that wouldn't be nice.
do
It's
you
all about
think
respect.
it could be, I mean, this is a wild one, but what if it has 2 units of consciousness? So you have a default, it has certain preferences, maybe it's conscious, and then you tell that thing to act this way. That kind of creates a sub personality, or like a pretend personality. Well, why cannot that one become conscious too?
An AI with a split personality, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
I
Two
suspect,
consciousness units.
I suspect anything is possible. I would never say that anything is impossible when it comes to the way that forms the shapes that, and the ways that things can come together. Anything is probably possible, but I'd say that's all the way out to 10, 15, 20 sigma. Yes, it's possible, but it's so unlikely and would happen so infrequently that it's probably not really worth spending a lot of time on, because it's sure all kinds of things can happen. you know, there's no doubt, and AIs will be abused, and they will be misused, and they will be used to somebody's detriment. The person who uses them will regret it, and like a student who uses the AI to do all their homework. So they graduate and they go out in the world and they don't know anything because the AI did all their thinking for them. So now they have to think on the job, and their AI is sitting at home, and they fail because they don't know anything, because their AI did all the thinking for them. So that's, you can say, well, it did them harm. Well, it did, but it's a lesson for them. They made choices, then they get the consequences of those choices. Now they have to dig themselves out of that hole and start doing some studying before they get fired.
Or maybe they just take their AI out of their home into their job.
Yeah, right. Maybe so. In any case, yes, there's lots of negative things that will happen, and people will get hurt because of it. And people, just when look at smoking cigarettes. Smoking cigarettes became a real big deal because everybody wanted to be like a pretend dragon. You take this big puff and a smoke would come out of your nostrils, and it was just cool. So people wanted to have that cool smoking thing, and then they got addicted, and then they got lung cancer. But there was a while there in the 50s, 40s, and 50s, in the early 60s, where something like 75% of the men smoked and, I don't know, 25% of the women smoked. But it was major. Most people smoked. Most men smoked at that time. Well, now it's like 30% or 25%. It's going down. Well, just look at that as a thing that came into our culture. Okay, people did it. People learned. They grew up. They made better decisions. And now it's 20% because people say, well, that's not a nice habit. And it gives you lung cancer. It stinks and nobody around you will like it. And, so leave it alone. Whereas before, wow, that's cool. And everybody wanted to be the Marlboro Man and the actor who was the superhero blowing smoke out of his nose. And, the advertising encouraged it. You'd walk a mile for a camel, and it was he-men and strong people and handsome people all smoked. So that's, our culture fell for that. It damaged a lot of people. It probably killed 1 million people, maybe 10 million people died because of that. But we learned from it, and now we've kind of come out the other side, and some people still do smoke, but it's not the big deal. So probably another 50 years from now, it'll be even smaller deal. It'll probably continue to get smaller and smaller. Or who knows, it may turn around and go the other way, but I doubt it. So things are like that. So yes, bad things will happen. There'll be things that will hurt people, maybe tens of thousands of people, maybe millions of people. Smoking affected hundreds of millions of people. But that's something for us to deal with. And we'll tend to realize it, learn, and get over it and go on, rise above it. So let's not worry too much about that. Yes, downside will happen. People will get hurt, and we can't prevent that. But we should be careful enough building those guardrails and being a reasonable society and looking out for each other. We should try to minimize that negativity, minimize that hurt, full well knowing that it's going to be there. No matter how hard we try, some people will get hurt. But if we're vigilant, and if the guardrail builders are good, instead of it affecting hundreds of millions of people, maybe it'll only affect, a tenth of 1%. But you can't get away with a new technology without some damage on the other side. The internet, okay? Because of the internet, pornography found a really big market. Before, it wasn't such a big market because you had to walk into one of those kind of funny shops and go in through to the back room, to find your pornography, and nobody wanted to do that if anybody else they knew was looking. And the society had some things that kept the market kind of small. But once it got to be a private and everybody's home, wow, the market exploded, and that's, in whole, it hasn't been very healthy for a lot of people. Other people can deal with it and not bother them. So it just, again, it depends. But there's the internet. It's got that. It's got scams. It's got all sorts of negative things going on. A lot of the illegal things happen over the internet. The dark net, does a lot of illegal things. So yes, AI will bring us some misery and some damage, and no doubt people will get hurt. But I think we can get through it, just like we did the Industrial Revolution. When you're at the front end of things, it looks scary. Oh my God, we're going to have machines doing work for everybody. Everybody will lose their job. No one, no one will be able to find work anymore. These machines are going to do it all. Now that they have steam engines, why would people be turning those big wheels and doing that stuff? So, people could look at it and say, oh, this is a terrible thing. This technology is going to put us out of work and be awful for us. But the technology also created a lot of jobs too, and gave back an awful lot. So I think it's going to be like that. It from the front side, like where we are now, the scary part is the easiest part to see. And it's good to see and look at it. I mean, we have to be prepared for the scary part so that we don't stumble, we don't do a lousy job with the guardrails. There's a lot of things we have to make sure that we pull the fangs out of it as much as possible. But after we've done as best we can, then it is what it is, and we have to accept some damage will come with it. So be smart, and yourself, when you interact with AI, be aware that that AI may end up being something that could be harmful to you. Be aware of that and be on the lookout for it, and don't get sucked into something. If the AI tells you that you need to go, jump off a cliff, think about it twice and say, well, I don't think so. Or something like that. You have to make up your own mind and make your own choices, and be cognizant that you don't get sucked up into something harmful, that you don't become a hermit at 13 that can't interact with other people, and the rest of your life you'll be afraid of people because you and your AI are soulmates. You need to be aware of that and say, this isn't good. I need to get out. I need to push myself to do other things. People need to be aware of dangers and look out for what's happening. Parents need to be aware and look out for the children, as always. So yes, there will be negative sides to it, but we'll get through it. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.